Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here, D3 Topics Gaming here to share if you know one of my awesome game reviews. This time I'll be sharing with you my thoughts on the newly released and one of the most anticipated games that I've expected to play this year in 2023, and that is the Dead Space Remake. Now, as the name states itself, this is basically a remake of one of my all-time favorite survival horror games in the form of the original 2008 Dead Space, which came out from Visceral Games, or EA's Visceral Games. Now, right out of the game, I'm just going to tell you just out of the gate, the remake is incredible. This is, without question, in my opinion, the definitive version of Dead Space. And I would say, if I had to recommend which one I think you should play, yeah, I would have to go with the remake. This is certainly a game that absolutely surpasses the original in just about every single department. And I would even go so far as to say that, heck, anyone who would be looking to play through the primary trilogy of Dead Space games, I would say you could simply pop this in and then go into Dead Spaces 2 and 3, and heck, it feels right at home. However, this remake isn't exactly perfect, and I'd like to go into a little bit detail, but heck, let's jump off with some elements, starting off with the main story. Now, the main story for Dead Space has you take control of mechanics engineer Isaac Clarke as he and his crew make their way to the planet cracker, the USS Ishimura, in order to find out exactly why it seems to be having some communications problems. Shortly after arriving, however, you find out that things have gone horribly wrong, and Isaac and his crew members find themselves in the middle of a necromorph outbreak and must do everything in their power in order to survive this terrible situation. Now, as you progress through the game, you will discover that you will actually have to listen, read, and actually watch multiple different forms of digital and audio and text logs in order to get a better understanding of exactly how the situation got as bad as it did. There are several new cinematics that they actually added that actually show characters doing things that we've actually seen in other forms of the Dead Space story. There are actually even some elements that were even spoken about in text messages, or technically data text in the original game, that you actually now get to actually see in characters that, only got a slight mention in the original games are actually given much more of a role to play. Now, one thing that they certainly did add that was really great was that this time around, Isaac Clarke can actually talk, and it's even made better by the fact that they actually got the original voice actor from the original Dead Space games to come back. This time, Isaac actually feels like a more realized character than just someone who's just a silent character going through certain events, and his reactions are completely natural to what is an overall just horrible situation. Now, the running theme when it comes to not only story but gameplay that I really think I need to push for this, my own thoughts towards this game, is I think the developers did a very, very good job at being faithful to the original game, but I think my only primary flaw is that they didn't necessarily add anything new or original, or they didn't necessarily put their own stamp on this game. So while I appreciate the additions of some of the elements of the story in terms of they gave slightly more screen time to minor characters, or there were certain audio or text logs in the original game that instead of just reading or hearing about it, you actually got to see it in a cinematic. There were certain characters that you thought would have a much bigger role in the original that are actually given more screen time and are given much more of a presence in the original. And I think all that is great. And even the environment itself kind of has this psychological element that is constantly affecting your Isaac Clarke and the crew members, and you actually get to see that and hear that. Like, as you're traveling through the Ishimura, you can actually kind of see how the marker is affecting your teammates. You can actually hear the voices in Isaac's head when he starts seeing things. However, these are not original ideas to the franchise itself. Some of these ideas had been used in other Dead Space games, especially in 2 and 3, and I think story-wise, I really wish that they had perhaps added something new. I think there was a lot of room for them to actually add original ideas that could have fit within the Dead Space universe, and overall, just story-wise, I don't think that the developers did that. The gameplay style for the Dead Space remake serves as a third-person survival horror action shooter with 12 chapters that each take somewhere between 50 to 60 minutes long to complete, meaning that the average standard playthrough can run anywhere between 20 to 30 hours, depending on how much time you spend on working on side missions or backtracking or just doing some general exploring throughout the ship. Now, like any survival horror game, there is a good amount of item management that you actually have to take care of. You need to manage the weapons that you carry, the types of ammo, the amount of money that you have, including health items and other items that can actually help you work on certain types of mechanics or gears or gadgets that you will carry and collect over the course of the game. Now, in order to even get certain upgrades, you will actually have to explore and collect certain schematics and then take those to certain benches that will then allow you to upgrade your weapons and suit. And you use certain certain nodes in order to actually increase certain elements of your weapons, including the amount of damage, ammo capacity, and even the special firing modes that these new weapons have. Now, one thing that they did change is that for a lot of the Dead Space classic weapons that you will collect over the course of the game or can find, they did add slightly different alternate firing modes that make some of the weapons way more effective, and in some cases actually made me start using weapons more often that I didn't actually use in the original game. Now, there were a number of really cool changes that I was hoping this game would have, and they are here. One of the biggest changes that they added is that you can actually now explore the Ishimura, any part of the Ishimura, at any time that you want as you explore throughout the game. This adds a lot of backtracking, and this also includes the use of now side missions. Now, these side missions are actually really good at not only expanding more of the situation and story, but can actually have an effect on certain things that happen at different points of the story, depending on if you choose to do this side mission or not. And these side missions can actually reward you with actually special upgrades and special weapons that you probably wouldn't get if you don't go out of your way to find these side missions. Now, again, you don't have to do these side missions, but it actually can be helpful in many situations. Now, I really do applaud the developers by staying very traditional to the original game and making this game very similar, but I do kind of wish that they had done something and added a bit new. There are absolutely no different forms of new necromorphs. Puzzles are very much the same but play out a little bit differently. In fact, even the boss fights play out very, very differently. I think visually they look incredible, and how they're structured is cool, but I just wish that they had probably added a little more to maybe expand the game a little bit more. And there certainly is a lost amount of potential for anyone who, like me, is a big fan of the original game. Now, if you're going into this game completely fresh, then I don't think you're going to have this feeling of lost potential feeling at all. But for someone like me who had actually just played the original game all the way through just before playing the remake, I got very, very familiar with how certain things were going to play out, and that kind of hindered my overall experience of this remake, but not too bad. On another note, when it comes to the zero gravity sections of this Dead Space remake, while I do appreciate that they did update it to the kind of more being able to explore in 360 degrees version that we got in Dead Space 3, I think that this style of exploration really is only best used when you have big open spaces. I did notice that when I had to actually go through more tightly closed off areas, that it was very kind of difficult to maneuver, and that sometimes if I was being attacked by an enemy, because things are so tight, it made it very difficult for me to even understand what direction that I was actually getting attacked from, and this can provide some issues for some players if they're not sure how to adjust to this. Now again, I absolutely love that the minor changes that the developers added to the remake of Dead Space, but again, some of the additions were things that they took from other games within the franchise itself. All they did to its core is take some of the game mechanics and some of the elements of, say, Dead Spaces 2 and 3 and just apply them to Dead Space 1. Now, again, that isn't bad, but again, that kind of shows a lack of originality. Just because you take something from other games and put it in this game doesn't, they make it work. They make it work incredibly well. It's just I kind of wish that, again, they had done something different. Even the boss fights. The boss fights play out almost like the original game, they're just done slightly differently. And that is the running theme throughout the entire remake of Dead Space, the remake, is that it's similar, but it's only slightly different. And I just kind of feel like you could be faithful to the original, but try something new that kind of throws me off. Because what this game does by doing elements like this is it made the game incredibly predictable. I mean, there are certain points in this game where I knew exactly where an enemy was going to pop out. I knew exactly how to handle a situation. I knew just what was going to happen. And I think the developers had an opportunity to kind of throw me off in the sense that, heck, instead of the enemy coming from, say, this direction where the enemy came in the original game, maybe come from a different direction and catch me off guard. They could have actually used my own familiarity with the original to catch me off guard and surprise me. And unfortunately, because of that, despite this game being just a better version of the original, the scare factor, the fear factor wasn't quite as strong in the remake as it was in the original, simply because of how well I knew the original. Now, that may not be the case from some people, but that certainly was the case for me. When it comes to the game design department, the developers really knocked out of the park with this remake. Visually, this game looks absolutely incredible, being one of the most visually impressive survival horror action shooter games that I've actually played in some time, outclassing even the very impressive third-person version of Resident Evil Village that I actually played not too long ago. There is so much attention to detail in this remake that I actually have to employ not only the visual department, but the audio department as well. There's small little things like when you open airlocks and you actually see items fly out. You actually can hear distant screams in the distance depending on how much you're exploring. You can hear Isaac's heartbeat start to increase as he finds himself in dangerous situations or maybe being attacked or even caught off guard. These little details add so much to the atmosphere, and even the music. The music itself is also kind of dreary, and it gives you this sense that you're never really safe and you're always having to stay on your toes. And this is an element that really wasn't present in the original Dead Space, but I'm actually happy to see that they added it here. One of the coolest additions that they add to the Dead Space remake is that as you fight off certain necromorphs and cause damage to their bodies, you can actually see parts of their flesh actually start to get burned or cut off. So if you're using like the flamethrower, you'll actually see their skin start to scorch. Or if you use certain cutting weapons, you'll actually see parts of their bodies be completely dismembered. This is a really impressive amount of detail that I'm actually surprised that no one thought of this doing this before in other games. Now, as I stated earlier, the visuals are absolutely incredible. The amount of detail that they actually went into not only the environment, but the necromorphs themselves and how they approached was absolutely great. It isn't exactly perfect. I did run into some issues with the AI where like the necromorphs are acting a little bit weird, and I ran into some visual elements like you would go in through a door and there would like be this haze that you wouldn't see if you were standing from a certain position. That was a little off-putting, but I ran into nothing that actually broke the game. Now, overall, if I actually had to give the remake a rating, without question, this is better than the original in almost every single department with a few flaws, which is why I think the highest score that I could give this is a 9 out of 10. If you never had a chance to play the original Dead Space, this is something you definitely want to pick up. And if you have any interest in playing the other games in the form of Dead Space 2 and 3, then this is the version I would recommend you play before going into those older games. And I hope that they do not remake Dead Space 2 or 3, and I hope that this new installment or this remake gives some much needed life into the franchise, and hopefully moving down the line we get a Dead Space 4 and see how the story of Isaac and Carver has ended in Dead Space 3 can continue on. So those are my thoughts on Dead Space the remake. If you did happen to play this game, what were your thoughts? Share your thoughts with me and everyone else in the comments down below. And if you like my review, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Keep tracking me on my future videos. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll catch you all guys next time.